Biden touches down in Ottawa at about this time tomorrow. What's at stake for Canada during this visit? And just how strong is the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau? Kirsten Hillman is Canada's ambassador to the U.S. Hi, Ambassador Hillman. Pleasure to welcome you back. Thanks for making the time.
I'm happy to be here, Vassy. Thanks.
I was listening to John Kirby not too long ago talk about sort of what's at stake during this visit. And he was describing the relationship year by year. He said the first year of Joe Biden's time as president was focused on rebuilding the relationship between Canada and the U.S. Do you agree with the characterization that it needed to be rebuilt?
Yes, I do. In some respects, I think it did require rebuilding. I think that, with the previous administration, as people know, we had some important successes. The renegotiation of the NAFTA was very good. The early days of pandemic management, I think, was a real success between Canada and the U.S., and I have give a lot of credit to the former president's COVID team that worked closely with us on all of things. But it wasn't an administration that was that interested in working with allies to solve certain kinds of problems. Climate change wasn't high on the priority list. They had some skepticism around NATO. And so there were a lot of these sort of things that we do together bilaterally and things that we do together in the world that required a bit of care and attention.
I think there is a perception among Canadians that the relationship is better now. But there is also, and I was speaking to some members last night, for example, on this show of the NAFTA Advisory Council, kind of like a bit of a warning, don't, yes, there are friends, but there are still some big irritants. Is it your view that the relationship is better under Joe Biden, that there are fewer of those irritants?
I think that we are working together on many more things under Joe Biden, many more things that are of common interest. So that in and of itself makes the relationship better. We are working together on climate change. We are working together on our economic sort of resilience, dealing with strategic vulnerabilities in our supply chains, things that came out through COVID, then of course also even more so with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we are deeply coordinating on these issues in a way that we didn't with the previous administration. One, because the world was different, but also because, as I said, it wasn't really their inclination. So the relationship is stronger. Does it mean it's problem-free? No, it doesn't. It's huge, and it's never going to be completely problem-free.
Has the sort of, like, would you characterize the sort of size of the irritants, though, as any different, I guess is what, like, I take your point that you get along on more things, you're cooperating on more things, but have the irritants diminished in their significance at all?
I think so. I think they have. And I think that what we're seeing is because of the cooperation on certain things together, we are getting a lot of things done together. So the Caravan for Canada in the IRA legislation, the legislation that dealt with EV batteries, critical minerals, manufacturing of new technology, new vehicles, electric vehicles. That we did because of our ability to really talk to the Americans and really make the case that integration is better than protectionism. Do we win that argument, or do we succeed in making that point at every instance? No, not always. I mean, President Biden is also very focused on making sure that he creates a lot of jobs in the United States. And so our job is always to, repeatedly explain in the context of specific files, specific facts, that creating jobs in the United States will happen more with an integrated, strong Canada-U.S. economic relationship. And they will, in fact, lead to job losses by breaking apart these very, very important and effective commercial relationships.
I have sort of two quick follow-ups on that very specific issue, and on the IRA especially. You did manage the sort of carve-out and ultimately the legislation that was tabled. It hasn't been fully implemented. Is there, from where you sit, the possibility that there are other avenues for Canada to be a bigger part of the IRA, or what the IRA is supposed to do, or is it kind of a fait accompli at this point?
Well, I think the IRA is an effort to supercharge investments in areas to lead to a clean economy and clean energy. And we are by necessity a part of that because of being the biggest energy supplier to the United States on all forms of energy, traditional energy, but wind and air and hydro. And so as they increase their focus on those forms of energy, the technology, the expertise, the materials required for that transition will necessarily lead to benefits in Canada.
Will they, though? Just to be clear,
Yeah,
because the subsidies in the way in which they're arranged, the tax credits, for example, are aimed at focusing all of what you just laid out on American-made stuff, on American-produced stuff.
To a certain extent, there's a different formula, kind of depending on the particular incentive, and there are many incentives at play. But for many of them, there will be reliance on Canadian inputs and Canadian technology and Canadian service providers. So, and we are also creating an ecosystem of energy transition. So those kinds of investments in the United States will lead to knock-on benefits in Canada. I'm sure of it. And our government, as we've discussed before, is also committed to making sure there's a level playing field for investment attraction.
And what about Buy American? Because in this, just following the State of the Union address, I remember we spoke, and you emphasized, look, it's not a brand new announcement, but they are going to be new rules, and Canada is seeking some sort of exemption, but we don't have any idea if that's going to be the case. Does President Biden come here and announce there will be an exemption for Canada? Are we any closer to that possibility?
So I think it's inevitable that the leaders will talk about this. I think that it's inevitable that we will continue to demonstrate, as you and I talked about before, how we have to make the case that the policy objective that the president is trying to achieve through these domestic content requirements isn't achieved when you apply them to Canada. That's the case that we make. And when we make that case and we can prove it, we have a fairly good success rate. So it can't be made in the abstract. So we're continuing to try and make it in the concrete. We are, I think, engaged in a fairly rigorous discussion with the Americans on that. As to what will happen tomorrow and the next day, I think that we'll see where that goes. But there's no question that it'll be something that the leaders will talk about, and our delegations, because it's not just the leaders that are having conversations. There's two whole delegations that will be spending a day
and I know those delegations, as well as the leaders, indicated from both John Kirby and our staff here that the Safe Third Country Agreement is also up for discussion. And I listened recently to some comments you made and sort of interestingly contrasted them against your counterpart in the U.S., or from the U.S., David Cohen. I guess I'm hoping to ascertain for Canadians where things actually sit, because I feel like from some parts we're hearing that there could be movement from the United States on it, and then from Ambassador Cohen it seemed like there was not a willingness to engage on whatever modernizing that agreement means. Do you ultimately think the United States is prepared to change that agreement?
I think that the United States is willing to talk with us in a serious way about all the tools at our disposal to deal with the challenges of irregular migration. And what that means is it's not just a conversation about the STCA. I know that's what a lot of people in Canada are very focused on, and I understand that. But that interaction with the Americans on that topic has to happen in the context of the entire hemisphere and the challenges that are being faced by people on the ground, right, in these countries that are fleeing their countries, and looking at solutions whereby we might try and ameliorate their situation in their country, maybe find solutions for them in neighboring countries, maybe find legal pathways for them into third countries, including Canada and the U.S.
That's something Canada would be a part of?
I think we talked about that in Los Angeles, right? It's part of the LA Declaration, which is the Summit of the Americas Declaration. It's about all of the different tools that we use to try to make the lives of these folks who are really in desperate situations better. So in country, in neighboring countries, in third countries, all of it.
And I get that, because ultimately what's happening at Roxas Road is a symptom of something else. And I certainly understand that. I guess what I'm trying to get clarity on, though, is whether the immediate issue of the fact that the Safe Third Country Agreement means that people who cross over by foot in between those official points of entry will ultimately be able to seek asylum in Canada. All that stuff you laid out is, I understand it, and I understand the effect it would ultimately have, but it will take a very long time. And the central question, really, I think, for a lot of Canadians is whether Roxas Road can be addressed in this meeting or through a change to that agreement. Right. And I'm still not clear on whether there is willingness on the part of the United States, or it's being conveyed to you, I should say, that they are able, willing, going to do something like that.
So I guess I would answer that question in two ways. There's two answers to that question. The first is, without question, this will be discussed at the meeting between the leaders and the meetings between the two delegations, because it's a very important issue to Canada. And the U.S. will and always does engage with us on things that we say are a priority for us. This administration always does that, and I have every confidence that they will hear. They, last week with Minister Fraser, I think it was last week.
Yes,
Might have been the week.
yeah.
Okay, time is getting very.
He's up on the show in a few minutes,
Okay,
yeah.
so he had very good conversations with Secretary Mayorkas about that. It was around the entire situation, but they also discussed the Safe Third Country Agreement. So I guess the second part of my answer is they are listening to us and our concerns and our view that this legal mechanism that we have isn't serving the function that we want it to. So there's a goodwill there. Where that takes us in the next 48 hours, I mean, that's not really for me to say at this point. We'll see.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'm out of time.
Okay.
Thanks for your time, Ambassador,
My
as
pleasure.
always.
Thanks.